When Israel was founded on May 15, 1948, it was a very small, poor, beleaguered country, instantly invaded by the armies of the surrounding Arab states. It really didn't have an army as yet. It had a militia, young people, poorly armed, greatly outnumbered. A big difference from what you know today as the Israel Defense Forces, which, although we're still a small country, the Israel Defense Forces is a strong, I may even go so far as to say, a powerful army, very capable of defending Israel, and has defended Israel throughout the years of Israel's existence. The War of Independence in 1948, when we had to fight the combined onslaught of the Egyptian army, the Syrian army, the Iraqi army. The last time around, it was the Yom Kippur War, fighting Egypt and the Syrian army, who attacked Israel from the north, from the south, simultaneously. But it ended up being a great victory, and I think there's an understanding today in the Arab world that by the use of conventional armies, they have no chance of defeating Israel. And the credit for that goes, of course, to Israel's leaders, prime ministers, defense ministers, but first and foremost to the soldiers of the IDF. Well, I was associated with the Irgun already in the United States before I came here. So when I came, I joined the Irgun, and politically I've been associated with the people from the Irgun, who then went into the politics and created a party that was led by Menachem Begin, afterwards by Yitzhak Shamir, today by Benjamin Netanyahu. So that's been my political orientation, and it hasn't changed in over 60 years. We had a defense minister, one of my predecessors, Moshe, who changed his mind now and then, and he used to say that only donkeys don't change their mind. Well, maybe I'm a donkey, I haven't changed my mind. Well, I was Israel's defense minister during the first Gulf War, when the United States and its allies went to war against Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi dictator. And he then launched ballistic missiles against Israel from a distance of about 350 miles. We had 49 missiles hit Israel, one very close to my home. Accidentally, they were not accurate missiles, but just by accident, one of them landed not far from my home. And I had to deal with that situation. In those days, we had no way of intercepting these missiles. Once the button was pushed somewhere in Iraq, not many minutes later, the missile landed somewhere in Israel. What we had hoped at first was that the United States Air Force, would be able to hunt down the missile launchers and put an end to the missiles. But during the 5.5 weeks of the Gulf War, the missile just kept on coming. The United States Air Force turned out to be not able to locate the missile launchers and to destroy them. And so we were planning, as defense minister, supervised the planning of an Israeli action, which was meant to land Israeli troops in western Iraq and hunt down the launchers and put an end to the missiles that landed in Israel. But before we had a chance to do it, President Bush, senior at the time, declared a ceasefire, and so the war was over before we had the opportunity to retaliate. As I told you, I'm an aeronautical engineer, so I had a certain prejudice in that direction. And during my tenure as defense minister, I put a great deal of emphasis on the development of systems here in Israel that would make the IDF stronger. One of these developments was reconnaissance satellites, and as you probably know, Israel today has a number of reconnaissance satellites which contribute and add to the information that we can get from the United States and its network of satellites. We have our own satellites that can provide us with information. about areas that we are concerned about, like Iran at the present time. We developed, during my tenure as defense minister, the Arrow ballistic missile interceptor, a concept that at the time people thought was technologically impossible, something I wish we had had during the Gulf War. We didn't have it yet, but today we have the Arrow system, and that system has a very high probability of intercepting any missiles that are launched our way. I was a strong supporter of the program to develop an Israeli fighter aircraft, the Levi, for which we received considerable assistance from the United States, both financial assistance and technological assistance. Unfortunately, the airplane was canceled by a decision made by the Israeli government, which I think is today recognized by all to have been a very bad mistake. Well, we've had a number of waves of aggression against Israel throughout today, 64 years of Israel's existence. It started with the armies of the Arab countries, who felt very confident that they could defeat Israel. These were regular armies. They had tanks, they had aircraft, and naval craft. Israel at the time had almost nothing. But in a succession of wars, the War of Independence, the Suez Campaign in '56, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, it became clear that the Arab armies, even when they combined all their forces, even when they surprised Israel, they were not capable of defeating the IDF. And the next wave of aggression against Israel then was terrorism. If it couldn't be done by conventional armies, then maybe it could be done by terrorism. And in this day and age, terrorism is capable of inflicting massive casualties, as you know, in the United States. In 9/11, people are concentrated in office buildings, they're concentrated on buses, on aircraft, in places of entertainment. And so if you manage to bring in a suicide bomber, say, into one of these places, he can, by pushing the button, explode himself and to take with him another 30, 40, or maybe even thousands of people, as was the case in 9/11. Now, Israel's had to battle this wave of terrorism for a number of years. We were successful in defeating that terrorism in the year 2002, when the Israeli army entered Judea and Samaria, which had been under Palestinian control essentially prior to that, and which was the springboard for terrorist activity against the cities of Israel. So that wave of terrorism, I think we have overcome. There came another wave then that goes under the initials of DBS, disinvestment, boycott, and sanctions, try to isolate Israel economically. Fortunately, Israel is strong economically, and I think that has not been successful. Today, we're facing the ultimate weapon of terror, namely a nuclear weapon in the hands of the Iranians, who announce almost daily that it is their intention to wipe Israel off the map. And I think we will handle that as well. Well, they're going hell-bent for a nuclear capability. There's no question about that at all. They've been going at it now for a good 10 years. Unfortunately, except for Israel, the rest of the world was asleep and didn't pay any attention to it, didn't want to believe that this was happening. The director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, whose mandate it is to monitor these kind of developments around the world, the head of that agency was Mohammed el-Baradei, an Egyptian, who consistently said that there was nothing to worry about, that there was nothing going on there that should arouse suspicions. You wouldn't believe it. That man, when he left his post, was given the Nobel Peace Prize for his accomplishments, in quotation marks. Since then, he has been replaced by a Japanese gentleman who's doing a very effective job. And no sooner had he come into his position than he declared that the Iranians are going very actively for a nuclear weapon. So today there's a full awareness of what the Iranians are doing. I think there's a full awareness of the danger that that portends to the world, not just Israel, to the world. I think the President of the United States, Barack Obama, is aware of that as well. And so we're not alone in facing that danger, and I hope that we're going to be able to handle it. Well, first of all, it's important to remember that the real culprits when it comes to the missile capability in Iran, as well as in some of the other Arab countries, are the North Koreans. That technology came from North Korea, has been adopted in Iran, has been perfected in Iran. Once you have a missile that has the range, today the Iranians are working on missiles that will have ranges to reach not only Israel but Europe, and possibly in the future the United States as well. Once you have that kind of missile capability, with today's technology it is not overly difficult to provide these missiles also with accuracy so that they can home in on a target. So there's no doubt that the Iranians are also today perfecting more accurate missiles. If they intend to use a nuclear weapon, which I hope we will never give them the chance to do, then of course you don't have to be very accurate. If they then happen to hit somewhere near Jerusalem, it's going to hit East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem and all of the rest of Israel and probably some of the Arab countries as well. Well, we hope that they will never get there. As I told you, we today have the capability of intercepting such missiles, but there's never 100% capability, so even if one gets through, that's one too many. So I think the challenge that faces Israel today and the United States, no less so than Israel, is to make sure that they never reach that capability. Well, even under Mubarak, Egypt was never a friend of Israel. I think Mubarak was very rational in understanding that it behooved him and it was in his interest, in Egypt's interest, to maintain the peace treaty that had been signed by Sadat, in no small measure because it assured the continued aid from the United States that he needed so badly. The United States has been giving Egypt, ever since the peace treaty, $1.6 billion a year. And that in the Egyptian economy is a very important contribution to that economy. With the Muslim Brotherhood now taking over, we hear a lot more fanaticism, anti-Israel rhetoric, talk about the possibility of maybe having to revise the treaty, if not abrogating the treaty. I think that Morsi as well knows that if he endangers or risks continued American economic assistance, there's no future for Egypt at all, and probably no future for him as well. The Egyptian economy has been in a spiral of deterioration for the past year. I would say they are in no position to go to war against Israel, so that regardless of the rhetoric, which we don't like, that we hear from Egypt, I think in the foreseeable future, there's really no significant risk of Egypt going to war against Israel. Syria is in turmoil, in anarchy. Again, whatever capability they had, and they had military capability, a very substantial army and air force, I think that capability has been downgraded as a result of the civil war going on there. And again, for the foreseeable future, I'd say the next few years, I don't see a significant risk of the Syrians going to war against Israel. Never, I hope, never. That was a very bad mistake by previous Israeli governments who thought that they could achieve peace in the area by turning the Golan Heights over to the Syrian dictator. First to Hafez al-Assad, the father of the present Syrian dictator, Bashar al-Assad, both of them butchers, both of them that brought about the killings of tens of thousands of Syrian citizens. And it was just chasing the rainbow. There was no chance that that would achieve peace or even provide progress towards peace. It only would have weakened Israel. And I think today most Israelis realize that we're fortunate that these plans were never brought to fruition, because if they had, then we would see the kind of anarchy that today exists in Syria, the shooting and the killing, going on right directly on near the Sea of Galilee, near Tiberias, near some of Israel's important cities. Well, the Golan Heights originally, after World War I, when the Middle East was parceled up between Britain and France, had been intended to be part of what was called the Palestine Mandate, designated to be the future Jewish state. But the British and French, in negotiations that they held between them, delineating the border between Syria and what was then Palestine, concluded that the Golan Heights would be moved over to be part of Syria. So those who claim that the Golan Heights have always been part of Syria simply don't know what they're talking about in terms of the historical facts. As a result of the Syrians being in control of the Golan Heights, and that's what they are heights overlooking the Jordan Valley and overlooking the Sea of Galilee, were in a position for many years to fire down upon Israeli civilians, Israeli settlements and Israeli towns that were down below the Golan Heights. And it was only in the Six-Day War that the IDF managed to capture the Golan Heights and free the Israelis living in the valley from the terror that endangered them for so many years from up above. Well, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. I think that is recognized by the United States. It is recognized by Canada. I've just read the other day that the Foreign Minister of the Netherlands has urged the European Union to recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. They haven't done that yet, although it's so obvious that you don't need a microscope to read the writing that's on the wall. It is a terrorist organization. It is backed by the Iranians. It is financed by the Iranians. It is armed by the Iranians. They today support Assad in his fight to maintain his power in Syria. And they have amassed an armory of some 50,000 rockets with a range to hit all of Israel, from the north to the south. That's really an untenable situation. You might compare it to the time back in the days of President Kennedy, when the Soviets deployed missiles in Cuba that could hit the United States. And Kennedy wasn't prepared to put up with it, and those missiles had to be removed. It was an untenable situation. Well, these 50,000 missiles in Lebanon, in the hands of a terrorist organization that threaten all of Israel's civilian population, is, in my opinion, an untenable situation. We should not have allowed that situation to grow gradually and reach the present proportions, and I think it is going to have to be handled sooner or later. Now, under present circumstances, those 50,000 rockets in the hands of Hezbollah, they are the first line of defense of the Iranian nuclear effort. And they constitute a threat that would be leveled against Israel in case of military action against Iran, regardless of whether that action would be taken by Israel or whether it would be taken by the United States. Israeli civilians are going to have to bear the brunt of that missile threat. Well, you know, the current Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, visited Lebanon, I think maybe 3 or 4 months ago. He met with the President of Lebanon, I guess also with the Prime Minister. And he said that these rockets in the hands of Hezbollah was an untenable situation. He recognized the fact that in a country that presumably is sovereign, Lebanon, a member of the United Nations, I think 2 years ago even a member of the Security Council of the United Nations, that it was not acceptable that in a country like that there would be a private militia with weapons and capabilities that go far beyond the capability of the Lebanese army, and not controlled and not under the authority of Lebanon. So he made a very correct statement, if you like, maybe even a courageous statement. He made it in Beirut, but nothing happened. The United Nations does not have the capability, does not have the power, certainly does not have the will to really do something about violations of UN Security Council resolutions, about the fact that Iran threatens Israel and other member of the United Nations with destruction. This very same Ban Ki-moon just attended a conference in Tehran, although he was urged by many to not go to Tehran, and showed the Iranians that they were isolated, that he would not countenance the fact that a member of the United Nations, Iran, would threaten with destruction another member of the United Nations. The United Nations has some 90 Arab and Muslim member states. There's an automatic majority against Israel, regardless of whatever motion is put forth. So that we would have liked to be in a situation where we could turn to the United Nations and make sure that the United Nations would assure Israel's security, would prevent aggression against Israel. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Israel has a good relationship with Jordan. Jordan has an effective security organization that prevents acts of terror from Jordan against Israel. That's very important for Israel. But in Jordan, there is also a Muslim Brotherhood. There are groups that would like to overthrow the present monarchy of King Abdullah II. So it's a somewhat delicate and touchy situation. Well, the Jordanians in 1948, under King Abdullah I, the grandfather of the present king, invaded Israel simultaneously with the invasion by Egypt and by Syria into the newborn state of Israel, hoping to put an end to the existence of Israel and hoping to grab as much of Israel as they could. And they did manage to grab Judea and Samaria, what is generally referred to as the West Bank. And they annexed it to Jordan, and they gave Jordanian citizenship to the Arab population living in Judea and Samaria. It was only during the Six-Day War, when they joined Egypt in attacking Israel and Syria, that their army was defeated and Judea and Samaria were liberated by the IDF. So since then, I think the Jordanians realized that they do not have the capability militarily to defeat Israel. Although you may remember that King Hussein, the father of the present king, was a supporter of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, when Saddam Hussein was the dictator in Iraq. But he's wise enough to know that there's no point in antagonizing Israel. He has signed a peace treaty with Israel, and as I said, the Jordanian regime is effective in preventing terrorist action against Israel. That's important for Israel, I think also important for Jordan. We hope that regime will remain stable, but there are forces in Jordan that would like to bring down that regime. What we do know, of course, is that the Saudis are not great supporters of the Iranians. There is a schism between the Sunni Muslims and the Shia Muslims. The Shia Muslims are in Iran. Hezbollah also Shia Muslims. I think the Saudis are concerned about the possibility of a nuclear weapon in the hands of the Iranians. So strange as that may seem, there seems to be a certain identity of interests here between the Saudis and the United States, and maybe even Israel at the present time. Well, Israel has a special relationship with the United States, and it has a special relationship with Canada and a few other countries around the globe, countries that are democracies and that understand that Israel is a democracy, and that it's a small country that is courageously fighting against very big odds. I wouldn't say that we have a special relationship with Russia under Mr. Putin, and we have diplomatic relations. There is a Russian ambassador here, an Israeli ambassador in Moscow, But it seems that under Putin, the Russians have ambitions of reacquiring great power status. I don't think that's really in the cards. See themselves as rivals of the United States. And taking that position really doesn't make for a very special relationship with Israel. Well, it's a very important relationship. That's almost so obvious that it doesn't need saying. The United States is the one superpower in the world today. And it is a great democracy and really a leader of the democratic world. And Israel, a small democracy, is a member of that democratic world. So that relationship, which is really in the realm of an alliance, I would say. I don't know that the United States has a closer relationship with any other country, as close a relationship with any other country as it has with Israel. And Israel certainly does not have as close a relationship with any other country as it has with the United States. So that relationship is very, very important to Israel. But as for counting on somebody, on the United States, say, I think most Israelis feel that we have to count on ourselves. Well, you know, during the time that I was foreign minister, which is some years ago, I raised something of a turmoil in Canada when, on occasion, addressing a Canadian audience. I said I was surprised that we did not have as close a relationship with Canada as we had with the United States, because our close relationship with the United States is based on the fact that we have common values and common ideals, and we have the very same common values and ideals with Canada. So why don't we have as close a relationship? And we did not have as close a relationship with Canada for many years as we did with the United States. And that changed when Stephen Harper was elected to be Prime Minister. And it turns out that Stephen Harper is an idealist. He's a believer. And he believes that you should have a close relationship with a country like Israel because you share common values and common ideals. And that is the foundation of the relationship with the United States. And it turns out that Canada today, under the leadership of Stephen Harper, like the United States for many years, places great emphasis on ideals and on values, whereas many other countries in the world, democracies, like most of the countries of Western Europe, place emphasis on what's called realpolitik, on interests. Values and ideals don't matter that much. Let's see what are our interests. In the United States and now in Canada, there is an identity, a congruence between values, ideals, and interests. Common values and common ideals make for common interests. Well, I'm not a believer in the land for peace formula. And I think today most Israelis do not believe in that formula. Although in past years, some did, and they were under the apprehension or misapprehension that if you only gave the Arabs enough land, in return there would be peace. And Israel's made very significant concessions. The biggest one of all was to the Egyptians in the peace treaty with Egypt, where something happened that had never happened in the history of international relations. A country that attacked Israel 5 times, was defeated 5 times, had everything they lost in the war returned to them. That's never happened before. I don't know if it will ever happen again. It's certainly not a very good precedent. What you're telling the aggressor is, you can practice aggression. If you lose, you won't lose. You'll get everything back. And so Israel became a very much smaller country when it agreed to turn the entire Sinai over to Egypt. But we talked before about the fact that there was a readiness to turn the Golan Heights over to Syria. The Gaza Strip, in effect, has been turned over to Hamas, and Israelis have suffered grievously as a result of the rockets that were launched from the Gaza Strip into Israel. And I think today most Israelis realize that if there were, if an Israeli government were to turn the Judea and Samaria, what people call the West Bank, over to Palestinian control, the direct result would be missiles from that area into the population centers of Israel. So that's not likely to happen. I think that in order to understand that, you have to understand the yearning for peace. Now, a country that's been at war ever since it was established, around 64 years, that has paid a heavy price for the fact that there has not been peace, heavy price because of the aggression that was practiced against it, in wars on the battlefield and by acts of terrorism. You can understand that there's a yearning for peace. And so there's a lot of wishful thinking here. And people want to believe that if you only make this or that concession, if you only give up claim to this or that land, there will be peace and there will be no more wars, and mothers will not have to be concerned about the lives of their sons or their daughters. You know that we have girls serving in the IDF as well. But I think that most Israelis have been disabused of that illusion. It's a delusion, really. Well, the problem of land ownership in Judea and Samaria is very problematical, as I think you can easily understand, because the area has been under the control of so many different governments over the years. Under Jewish control, if you go back to biblical times, right? Under the control of the Ottoman regime, Turkish regime, under control of the British during the days of the British Mandate, under the control of the Jordanians, today under Israeli control. So when you point to a certain plot of land and say, who is the rightful owner of this land? It's not at all clear. We know that the Jordanian king, when he annexed the Judea and Samaria, handed out properties to people who were his favorites. Whether this was a proper, legitimate title to the land or not, we don't really know. So it's very difficult to say who is the owner in many, many cases. And so there have been disputes and differences of opinion about the ownership. In my view, whenever somebody, say from the Arab community, comes forth and appeals to the Israeli Supreme Court, and he has that right of appeal, because Israel is a country where the law pertains, a country of law. And if it turns out that he claims that he has title, even if it is questionable, but if there's recognition of the title that he has, but somebody has already built on that land as part of a Jewish settlement, authorized originally by the Israeli government, the obvious solution is to compensate that man. The obvious solution is not to remove the people from that land. Compensate him if you recognize his title to that land. Compensate him either with alternate land, piece of land, or by financial compensation. That is what would have been done, I think, in every other country in the world. The Israeli government has been trying to be very, very meticulous, I think because of criticism and pressure that's been applied from abroad, also from the United States. I think the position of the United States government to this day is that Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria are illegal, which is very far from being correct. There's no justification in international law or in Israeli law. As our Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he spoke before both houses of Congress, said, we do not come to Judea and Samaria as foreign occupiers. Right? You just need to read the Bible to know how true that statement is. So, as I said, the Israeli government, even the present government, has been very meticulous in, I think, sensitive to the criticism that has come from abroad, and has agreed with the Supreme Court decision that wherever title was recognized by a Palestinian Arab, even though the settlement had been authorized by the Israeli government, even though people had been living in the settlement, say in the case of Migron, for quite a number of years, to order the evacuation of these settlements. That's very unfortunate, it's very painful, and I hope we're not going to see repetitions of that happening again. Well, you know, one of the great, and maybe the greatest Zionist leader, Jabotinsky, wrote a very famous article many years ago, in 1923. We're approaching maybe 100, almost 90 years from the time it was written. It was called The Iron Wall, in which he said that the only possibility for peace being established between the Jews and the Arabs in this area is once the Arabs are convinced that they have no chance of throwing the Jews into the sea, that they have no chance of destroying the Jewish state. And I think that that almost prophetic vision is correct to this day. When that day comes, and I think it will come, when it is really clear to everyone that there's no chance of forcing Israel out of the area, of throwing the Jews into the sea, then there may be a chance to proceed towards peace. And here, the Iranian nuclear weapon that they're trying to achieve, of course, is the biggest impediment at the moment to the possibility of peace, because it creates the illusion that maybe there is a chance of getting rid of the Jewish state. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We have rights in this area. We are not foreign occupiers. They are important to Israel from a security point of view. If Judea and Samaria becomes a base for terrorist activity against Israel, as it was 10 years ago, Israel would be in very bad shape. In the wake of the defeat of Arab armies, we had a wave of terror strike Israel. And during a 2-year period or so, we lost 1,000 Israeli civilians as a result of Palestinian terrorist acts in the cities of Israel. Now, the base for that terrorist activity was in Judea and Samaria, in the Palestinian towns and villages of Judea and Samaria, so that we don't have to hypothesize what might happen if Israel were to evacuate that area, if the IDF were to evacuate that area. We've seen it before. We've seen that. We've been to that movie. That's what you call déjà vu. We've seen that, and I don't think Israelis want that to happen again.